Duggan, and I'm the lead organizer for the VPs for George campaign. Thank you for being here. We'll let some other people trickle in as they come in, but we wanted to make sure that we had enough time to go over everything that we have prepared. So before we get into talking about VPs, how many of you are familiar with any of the programs that we have been working on in the past 3 years? You can just raise your hand. Okay. Great, that's good to know. So for most of you, it won't be too much repetition of information, which is great. So I thought we could just get started by maybe just taking a minute to think. And maybe turn to the person next to you. If there's somebody near you that you don't know as well, it'd be great to introduce yourself to them and just think about the issue of violence. Not everybody who's in the room has been personally affected by violence, but I think it's a personal issue for all of us in some way. And to really come back and keep reminding ourselves why this work is so important kind of helps keep us renewed and refreshed. So if you could just take 2 minutes and talk to somebody near you about not just a general idea of why violence is an important issue, but trying to be specific and personal in that question. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. Come on in if you're just getting here. Christine Duggan. I'm the organizer of GBIO. Just keep Thank you so much for joining us. So we're just taking 1 to 2 minutes to just think about the issue of violence and how that's kind of personal to everyone, even if you don't know anyone who's this about why that issue might be
She's out today.
So,
oh yeah.
Save that for Q&A.
yeah, exactly.
We're doing great. Yes. We're Washington, D.C. Well, the Congress wasn't listening.
You saw at least a half before the rest of us.
We didn't get our time yet.
And I can find
They were pressing.
We have candidates going on telephone. We're going to miss the nice weather.
When you see Bill and the rest of the remnants we still very much regret not that people would join weeks ago. It was a suggestion. And we're going to Castine for Friday for 3 days to see what the road
We'll be back Wednesday. Maybe we should show
All right.
and then we'll figure out what'll work. Yeah, we need to care. I know that now.
Great, maybe just take 30 seconds and wrap up your conversations. Great, thank you so much. If anyone wants to share, what you were talking about, feel free. Any takers?
No.
Okay. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and why this issue is important to me, and then I'll talk about some of the work that BPeace has done in the past, how and why it got started, and then Rebecca Spangler will talk a little bit about what we've been working on in the past several months, and how, if you're interested, you could kind of help us continue this work. I also want to recognize that both Trinity Church and the Trinity Foundation have been some of our strongest partners since we began and for many years before BPeace started. And you have really inspired a lot of the work that we do. So thank you so much for everybody who's been involved with that as well. So again, my name is Christine Duggan for people just coming in. I grew up in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and I was raised Catholic. I was really involved in my church growing up, and through that kind of really became engaged in doing service work and in working in the field in education. So I began when I was in high school by volunteering at St. Kevin's Elementary School in Dorchester. On the weekends, I did mission trips. I tutored in a bilingual school in Framingham, and through that really became more aware of the world outside of a community like Sudbury or like a lot of communities that you might be coming from. I decided to go to Boston College to study to be a teacher, to try to address some of these issues in inequality and to try to figure out ways to give better opportunities to young people, particularly from urban environments. Through this and through Boston College, I became involved with St. Stephen's in the South End and started volunteering at their after-school programs and their summer programs. I worked at St. Luke's in Chelsea for a couple of summers with Be Safe. And what had always bothered me in the volunteer work or employment opportunities that I had was that I had the opportunity to kind of leave whatever environment I was working in and go back home to, BC and Chestnut Hill, or go back home to Sudbury and kind of leave a more dangerous environment behind. And I felt it was really unfair that the young people I was working with didn't have the same opportunities. There wasn't, a safer place for them to retreat to. So as I was thinking about this, I was student teaching at Brighton High School. My students were coming from Roxbury, Mattapan, and Dorchester, traveling on the T for an hour and a half to 2 hours each way every day. And it felt like, although education is one of my biggest passions, because there was a lack of safety for most of my students, education couldn't be a priority for them. Some of my students would end up being suspended for bringing weapons to school because they felt unsafe walking home at the end of the day. Because of this, I thought, how can I kind of do more broad policy area work that might address some of these community problems? Through that, I began working at the State House to try to figure out, how can we change the education system? How can we make our communities safer? How can I affect as many young people as possible? During my time at the State House, I enjoyed a lot of it, but also felt a disconnect from the communities that I was used to working with directly. And this hit me really hard when I found out in September of 2012 that George Fuentes, who was a young man that I worked with at St. Stephen's, had been shot. At that point, I felt very torn. I was angry at myself for choosing a path that felt safer and that felt more removed from the communities that I really wanted to help. Because of that, I became involved with the Be Peace for George campaign. I started talking to people about how can we get more involved, not just on a broader policy level, but in the day-to-day work that we do with young people and with adults. So through that, I started working for the Be Peace for George campaign full-time in September, and it's been an amazing experience. A lot of people who have really helped guide me through this process and teach me about the inner workings of the Episcopal Church, which it was more political than working in the State House. I'm sure many of you can recognize that. Many people who helped me through that process are part of the Trinity community. So I think those of you who are here today will have helped me with that as well. So in getting started, basically the Be Peace for George campaign started in the wake of George's death in 2012. My predecessor, Julia McMahon, who many of you might know, spent several months traveling the country doing research on what causes violence, what are some of the root causes that we could address as a faith community. Through that, and in working with Bishop Tom Shaw, who knew George personally and felt like this is really a time for us to take a stronger stand and to try to get the entire diocese involved in this type of work. So basically through his leadership, we selected 5 pillars which basically affect violence in some way, and by addressing these, we're hoping to prevent violence from happening. Many of them are programs that you will be very familiar with, particularly programs for youth, school and church partnerships, and working on legislation to end gun violence. So thank you for all the work that you've done on that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the work outside Trinity that Be Peace has been working on. This is a list of some examples of programs for youth. Be Safe and Be Ready are 2 that I have personal experience with, and know that it's a really great opportunity for young people, not just in the South End, but from other communities around Boston and in Chelsea, to really feel like there's a lot of support happening outside of school, and that some of the gaps that aren't being filled by public schools might be addressed in a community that serves young people year-round. In the past couple of years, some of these programs have expanded. So there's an after-school Montessori-style program in Haverhill. New Bedford has also started a summer program, which has been really successful so far. And obviously the work that TEEP has done and everything else with the Trinity Foundation has been awesome and inspiring, and has created a lot of young leaders in our community, which is very exciting news. Another issue that we have been focusing on since the beginning, and since before Be Peace got started, is creating more employment opportunities for young people. Rebecca will talk a little bit more about what we're currently working on in that area, but basically studies have shown that the more funding there are for youth employment programs, violence goes down. It's a very strong correlation. Despite this, it feels like every single year, particularly since budget cuts started happening in 2009, that it's a constant struggle to convince legislators that this has to be a priority issue, and that it doesn't just affect the communities that get the funding for youth jobs, but it affects communities across the state. We also have worked on not just public sector funding, but also encouraging leaders within the diocese to try to create jobs in the private sector. Warren Radke is one of our leaders that did a lot of great work in convincing people how important this issue really was. Church-school partnerships is something that you'll be really familiar with, particularly with the Dearborn School, with the Deborah McCormick School. St. Stephen's also has a really great partnership with the Blackstone School, which is just a few blocks from here. And we've really tried to help cultivate and foster other school-church partnerships in communities outside of Boston. So some of the things that, we've been able to accomplish and that we are trying to encourage in other communities as well are doing things like, can a church adopt a classroom and help meet budgetary constraints? You're always hearing about teachers who have to take money out of their own pockets to buy school supplies for kids or buy supplies for their classrooms. And doing that year after year is really a strain on teachers. It might be part of the reason why there's such a burnout in that field. So that's something we really encourage. We've held days of service for the past 5 years on Martin Luther King Day. We've had volunteers from universities around Boston, communities and churches come together and really work on projects that teachers and students have really spent the whole year asking for and hoping that would happen. So that's always a really great opportunity, and we're hoping to really continue that work so that it's not just a 1 day of service a year, but that we build stronger relationships between these communities. Communities for support and families, this is kind of a broader category. One of the biggest things that we do and that Trinity does under this is encouraging people to participate in the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. The Mother's Day Walk benefits the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, which is a program that's been around for 20 years and that we really look to for inspiration. When George was killed and his family and the St. Stephen's community was really at a loss for what to do, the Peace Institute offered counseling services. They paid for George's funeral. So it's really a personal connection, and we've continued to work with them and look to them for leadership, not just in Boston, but they're a national model for how to basically transform trauma and hurting into healing, hope, resiliency. We also have trained some of our leaders in the STAR model, which is strategies for building resiliency and awareness. And through that, and in partnership with the Office of Youth Ministry and with other diocesan offices, have been able to help build awareness around what causes trauma, how to recognize trauma, and how to really recognize that we all hold some sort of trauma from experiences in our life, but that it's an opportunity to transform into stronger people and build stronger communities. The last thing that kind of falls under this category, and also in partnership with addressing internal education and building more adult leadership, is around encouraging people to educate themselves and begin having conversations around what causes violence on a structural level. So that is around issues that cause poverty, structural racism. In the 2 years ago, we had a really successful campaign encouraging congregations to read The Rich and the Rest of Us. We had between 40 and 50 congregations that participated in that, which is really awesome. And we feel like it just helps to build stronger conversations and help provide a background for what's causing these issues and how can we be able to address them more efficiently. This year we're encouraging people to read The New Jim Crow. Has anyone read that? Yeah, so it's definitely a difficult read, I would say. Those of you who have read it might agree with me. So we think that doing it through a community, particularly a community who's also passionate about social justice issues, really helps to kind of frame the conversation around what's been happening in Ferguson, Missouri, what's been happening across the country with relationships between young men of color and police, and how that's really been building up for decades, and it's not just coming out of nowhere, and how all of us in the room are responsible for taking action in this area. the last pillar in the BP's acronym is around putting an end to gun violence through meaningful reform and legislation. That's one of the areas that we had the most success in, definitely in part due to the amazing amount of Episcopalians that were motivated enough to participate in hearings across the state, whether that meant driving to Worcester, or driving to Cape Cod, and really telling their stories about how violence has affected you or your communities, and why this is such an important issue and why gun reform needs to happen now. This was also a really great opportunity for us to develop some young leaders who were able to tell their stories. And despite booing from the NRA, it was a really successful campaign, and we were able to, achieve 4 out of 5 of our legislative priorities in partnership with the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And through the work that we're doing this year, we're continuing to address implementation of the law, making sure that despite the fact that we have a whole new administration, we have a new governor who wasn't responsible for passing this legislation, who it might not be a priority for him, that there are still people who care about this issue and want to make sure that everything happens. We're also committed to supporting national campaigns. This has obviously been a challenge, getting reform done on a federal level, so trying to kind of reflect on what we can do to be more effective and how we can look for best practices across the country on how to address broader change. Because of the difficulty with national reform, we've also looked to kind of alternative methods for how to basically make our communities safer. One of those is by supporting the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign, which is basically a campaign of Metro IAF, which is a national faith-based organizing huge conglomerate. GBIO, which Trinity is a member of, is part of that. And so some of you might be familiar with Do Not Stand Idly By, but I'll let Rebecca Spangler explain a little bit more about what we're doing to kind of get involved in that campaign and why it's particularly relevant.
Thank you, Christine. First of all, I'd like to start off by saying that there are pamphlets in the back in case you have any specific questions about the specific proposals about the things that we're going to be talking about. And we're going to try to have a quick question and answer session at the end, too. So again, my name is Rebecca Spangler. I've been a member of Trinity Church here for a number of years now, so some of you may know me. Some of you may not, but that's fine.
I know you now.
Do not stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is shed. It's from Leviticus 19:16. At the coffee hours, I'm often asked, why did you get involved with gun violence legislation? My answer is, as I watched the tragic events of December 14, 2012 at Sandy Hook Elementary School unfold on the news, my mind immediately went to my very close friend's then 5-year-old son, Zachary. Although he and his family had moved to Albuquerque that summer and therefore were nowhere near the shooting in Newtown, Connecticut on that fateful day, I kept thinking that my friend's child was the same age as those kids killed. What if he had been in that classroom? What would I have done then? I couldn't stand by and just do nothing. I felt called to help somehow. So I asked Reverend Bill Rich if Trinity Church was doing anything to help the surviving families. He referred me to the website of Trinity Church Newtown, and I began to look for ways to help. I made a donation, but I felt in my heart that wasn't enough. I had to do more. So when Reverend Rich invited me to join a group of Trinity parishioners and staff in the wake of the Sandy Hook tragedy, who were meeting to discern what people wanted to do, my answer was an unequivocal yes. From then on, at every anti-gun violence talk or hearing or walk I went to, There were lots of speeches given by people who have been personally affected by gun violence. I never heard anybody speak who had not personally been affected by gun violence. I am astounded by that fact. Although I do not have any idea of what it is like to lose a son, daughter, or loved one to gun violence, I know that the loss of innocent human beings is too great a burden for me to bear and do nothing about. This issue is important to me because I have had enough of seeing loss of life due to this senseless act of violence. One of the most important attempts at corralling gun violence in America is being spearheaded by the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign that Christine just mentioned. Metro IAF, as she said, asked Rabbi, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, so I apologize, Mosbacher, who endured the tragic death of his father at the hands of a gunman, of Beth Haver and Sheriff Shalom in Mahwah, New Jersey, to lead the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign. This is made up of faith leaders and citizens who are working to put an end to gun violence in America. According to their website, and I quote, "There are two markets for guns in America. One, a primary market involving sales of new and used firearms through regulated dealers, and a secondary market involving sales of new and used firearms outside these regulated channels." End of quote. Most of the problems stem from the secondary market and the gap-filled boundary between these two markets, resulting in a steady stream of cheap guns made more readily available to just about anybody. Over the past year, members of Do Not Stand Idly By have met with hundreds of law enforcement leaders, gun experts, and industry analysts. As a result, they have drawn up proposals, practical steps that manufacturers can take now to lead their industry in bringing safer and less lethal products to the primary market and sharply limiting the flow of guns into the secondary market. Those proposals are listed in the handout, as I said, that are at the back of the room. On Tuesday, May 12th, the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, GBIO, is holding a rededication assembly to force Governor Baker to make good on some of his campaign promises. One, that he implement the new gun law by ensuring private sales, background checks, and that law enforcement can effectively determine where guns come from. And two, be held accountable to his commitment to GBIO to join the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign to hold manufacturers responsible for creating safer guns and safer gun distribution chains, and to show the power of faith that some of our organizations and institutions can bring. The topics of this assembly will include criminal justice reform, public education, gentrification, housing affordability and homelessness, healthcare cost containment, and gun violence. Another very important factor in combating gun violence in our culture is trying to eliminate poverty. One way we can do that is through the Youth Jobs campaign that Christine briefly mentioned. The YJC was formed in 2009 to fight the crisis of youth unemployment caused by the recession. According to its website, state funding for youth jobs in the summer of 2010 was set to face a 50% cut, resulting in a loss of 27,000 jobs. With 20 organizations on its side, the YJC mobilized over 1,000 youth workers and allies to rally at the State House, build relationships with public officials, and collectively demand quality youth jobs at the local, state, and federal levels. This resulted in the saving of 100% of the youth jobs funding in the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts. In February 2011, over 1,100 teens marched to the State House and were successful in obtaining $9 million in funds for youth jobs and changing state policy so that more high-risk teens had job opportunities. In 2012, the YJC decided to branch out into the private sector. After researching which companies hired teens, the YJC met with hospital executives and corporate leaders. The YJC then then held a creative action at Fidelity to gain 30 new jobs for teens, and 2, continue to raise funding level in the state budget, and 3, make serious policy changes, including a statewide emphasis on quality jobs. Moving forward, the YJC will continue to work on the following. 1, obtain quality jobs in which youth will learn skills that will help them in the future. 2, get more summer and year-round youth jobs. 3, expand the private sector and small business job offers. And 4, work on A, building the coalition, B, engaging teens, and C, winning state funding for more youth opportunities. This past Wednesday, April 15th, 2015, the House Committee on Ways and Means released its budget for the fiscal year 2016. With disappointing costs made in youth employment programs, Representative John Skibak has proposed an amendment of $2 million so the budget can go from $10 million to $12 million, and will deal with 1, the cut made by Governor Baker that would cut 155 jobs, the $1 million needed to pay the youth the $1 minimum wage increase, without which we lose 595 more jobs, and 3, a small increase of $650,000 to add 325 new jobs to the program. There are other points that we would like for you to ask your representative to co-sponsor, listed on the handouts in the back. The budget debate begins on Monday, April 27th, and starting in May, the process will move to the Senate. We ask that you call your state representative and ask them to help restore youth jobs in the Commonwealth. Last but not least, for the past 3 years, Trinity has participated in the Mother's Day Walk for Peace, organized by the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, funded by Louis's parents in 1996, as Christine said, after the tragic shooting death of their son. The Institute has held a walk on Mother's Day to help support families who lost their children to violence. The Institute now provides a place of healing for victims of gun violence, an education program for the city of Boston and its surrounding communities, and is a training resource. The Peace Institute trains professionals from the police, the hospitals, and the courts, and the government systems to improve services intended for families in crisis. They also have established a nationally recognized peace education curriculum for elementary, middle, and high school students. I remember the first time we had a group from Trinity participate in the walk. It was a rainy day and I couldn't walk the 3 miles because my rheumatologist had recently told me to be non-weight-bearing in preparation for an upcoming total hip replacement I was about to have. I was, however, going to show up no matter what. I borrowed my dad's car and carpooled a few Trinity parishioners to the park, where some hardy walkers had already begun to congregate. It was just after 7 a.m., rainy and a little cold, but I remember wishing I could have walked that day. Hundreds of people showed up for the fundraising walk. Fortunately, I found a place at the BP's for George table and was able to volunteer and help give BP's for George t-shirts to people who paid for them. I gave those t-shirts to a lot of people that day. After the walk, there were speeches by both clergy, including Bishop Tom Shaw, people who have been personally affected by gun violence tragedy, including Tina Cherry, Louis D. Brown's mother, president, CEO, and co-founder of the Peace Institute, and Myrna Ramos, George Fuentes' mother. I was moved by all the speeches I heard that day. I opted to not go to the walk last year for health reasons, but this year I'm excited that I can and will be walking. I plan to be walking and smiling as though I'm leading a parade. During our baptismal covenant, we pledged, among other things, 1, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbor as ourselves, and 2, to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. This is an opportunity to live through our baptismal covenant. We ask that you please get involved. You can contribute by 1, attending the rededication assembly on May 12th, 2, signing up for one of our campaigns, again in the back, Or 3, calling your state legislator when asked to get involved with certain actions pertaining to gun legislation. So why do I choose to get involved with social justice campaigns specific to gun violence when I have not been personally affected? I say, why not?
Bravo.
Awesome, thank you so much. I know that it's 11 o'clock now, so if people need to run upstairs for service, that's okay. We're just going to take 2 minutes to go a little bit more in detail about how you can get involved, and then if anybody has questions, you can either ask them or talk to either of us afterwards. Judith Radke is also in the back, and she'll be signing people up for the Mother's Day walk and accepting donations. So if she tries to trip you on the way out, that's why. She's trying to slow you down. Basically, to review, most of the things that we're asking to happen are in the next few weeks, which is why it's so urgent for us to come here and talk to everybody who's really passionate about these issues. So the time to talk to your state representative would be right now. So as Rebecca said, last Wednesday the budget was released. Despite the fact that Charlie Baker's budget proposal actually was fairly fair to youth jobs, the House Ways and Means budget is not, and it has cuts to all of the programs that we prioritize. The 3 people, this is on a handout for your benefit, but basically the 3 people who have filed budget amendments are Rep. John Syback. He filed the amendment for the Youth Works program. Representative Alice Peisch filed the amendment for school to career programs. And Representative Aaron Vega filed programs for the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative. So all of these programs are a little bit different, and they target both different types of young people, whether it's young people who are ready to work in the private sector, if it's young people who have had experience with the juvenile justice system and need some additional support, or young people who are looking to be trained for a career and need extra education outside of school. So basically the budget debate happens next week. So if you can call your representative, the more reps that we have signed on as co-sponsors to these amendments and who are willing to participate in the budget caucus and really take a stand for these programs, the more likely we are to get funding restored. The second thing, yes?
You said you have a handout. Is there a handout I can take so that I can read from it when I call their office?
Yes, and it has a couple of talking points on it.
That would be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
We also talked a little bit about do not stand idly by, but not necessarily how you can get involved. Basically, the place where the campaign is right now is that we're trying to get as many elected officials on board with this campaign as possible. We already supposedly have Governor Baker, so we're going to make sure that he agrees to be a part of this campaign that he committed to while he was campaigning. We also have Mayor Walsh. We have the mayors from Cambridge, Somerville, Newton, and Wellesley who are on board, as well as mayors and police chiefs from across the country. So some way that you could get involved is if you live in a community outside of the towns I just mentioned, to either work with us or to set up a meeting with your local police chief or with your mayor and ask them to be a part of this gun buyers research group to say, you know, I'm a member of the public sector, I've been elected by this group of people, and I have buying power. If you look at between the police and the military, that's 40% of the gun market. So that's really a way that we can show that we have strength, that the NRA isn't the only one, you know, who can say what's happening with the gun market. The last 2 things would be doing a book group. I know that Trinity is one of the best churches in the diocese about having book groups around the new Jim Crow. We're encouraging that to happen you know, within your community or within your group of friends. I think it's a really powerful book, and it really gives a lot of important information as to why everything that's happening around police brutality is taking place right now. And the last thing would be to sign up for the Mother's Day Walk. If you can't participate, we encourage you to make a donation to the Peace Institute. We encourage you to pray for the walk or just spread the news via social media or your friends, or encourage your family to go. I'm making my mom go, so she's not that excited about driving into Boston at 8 a.m., but it's going to be a really good time, and it's a really great opportunity to meet new people. So I thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you.